Hey everybody, in this video I would like to share with you my basic Photoshop workflow. I use a combination of Adobe Camera Raw, Photoshop, Topaz Denoise and Nik DXO software, which we will just call Nik. I really love the results I get from using Nik software, and even though you can get similar results from Photoshop and Lightroom, my basic workflow incorporates Nik Color Efex. Topaz Denoise is my weapon of choice for denoising my images. I just find it works really well. A word of warning. When I use Nik DXO software, I do not use it in a conventional way. I would rather brush in the look within each layer in Photoshop than play with the control points in Nik. I'll show you how I do this throughout the video. Also, some of my practices you may question if you are a die-hard photo processor, especially my painting with a coloured brush technique. I really wouldn't use that if I was putting an image into a competition. But if it's generally for sharing on social media, I think my practices of painting with the coloured brush technique works perfectly okay. More about that in the second video of this series. In fact, I've used this technique in many images I have received recognition for. Also, I do not generally use Lightroom. I do understand how it works and that these days it's an incredible program. I just stick to what I know. I don't think I've learnt enough about Photoshop yet to move on to other programs, although you never say never. Okay, let's get on to the basics. Hi, I'm going to show you my 10-step basic workflow. I'll show you this on a couple of flower images which are straight from my camera. At the moment I'm viewing my images in Adobe Bridge. This is how I like to view and select the images that I will work with. So let's double click on the very first flower we'll work with. I think we'll choose this Cosmo. It's a raw file, and as it opens up into Adobe Camera Raw. Adobe Camera Raw is very similar to Lightroom. As I said before, I'm not really a Lightroom user, but you'll see some of these things are very familiar, even though they may be in different places. My first step to do is to check the highlights in the image and see if they need reducing. Let's just move the slider to the left to reduce them. I don't think they do need much of a touching up. In fact, in this image I might even be inclined to push them to the right a little bit more. Not very much, so around about 8 there. Let's have a look at the shadows. Do they need opening up a bit? I feel like they do because the area of focus is in the centre here. So I'd like to take a little bit of the shadow out of there. The white slider is quite magical for me. I use it mostly in my images. How I use it is I hold down the Alt key and push the slider to the right hand side until any clipping starts to show. And look, I can actually push that quite a way on this image before that clipping starts to show, and that's where the red is. So any area that's showing red on your image, well actually there's no detail when I push the slider up that high. So let me just push that back and see what it looks like. That's about where it was before. So I feel like maybe there is about good, so it's about 47. Then you can play with your texture button. So texture brings out the subtle detail in an image. Sometimes I like to push that up because in a simple flower photo like this, I really want to show the detail. To me, it's a portrait of a flower, so just like a human, you really want to show what strengths there are in the subject. And the clarity slider. Let's play with the clarity slider now. Sometimes I will just push that up a tiny bit, but more often than not I don't. Well, let's just leave it here on about 13. Dehaze I hardly use at all. Vibrance I will use over saturation, but to my eye at the moment, I really like the colours as shot. I don't think the vibrance needs, but let's just push it up and see. I'd rather play with that type of thing in Photoshop, but sometimes I will come back into Camera Raw and play with the vibrance slider. So in essence, it's not really a decision that I make right now. So I go down the bottom and I click open, and then the image will open in Photoshop. Hello. Now I must say that this isn't really going to be a Photoshop lesson for beginners. There is so much out there that you can learn Lightroom, Photoshop and other programs from that I encourage you to spend some time learning if you're just a beginner, as each and every image you make will need some type of processing, even if it's just a minimal adjustment. On the other hand, if you have a basic understanding of Photoshop, you will find my workflow easy to understand. When you've used a program for as long as I have, it's hard to remember how difficult it was at the beginning. Actually, I do remember it was very frustrating, to say the least. One thing to note is that my workflow is destructive, as in each layer carries the adjustments from the previous layer. So you're not able to easily go backwards as you do in an undistracted processing workflow. Okay, my first step is to copy the background layer, and it's easily to do. I've just made my layers panel actually quite large here so you can see what's happening as we go along. What you do is you can grab your background layer and drag it down to this little plus icon down the bottom, and it'll give you a background copy. I'm just going to throw that away at the moment because there is a much easier way to do that, and that's by using the shortcut called Command or Control J. So I'll just press that now, and let's name that New Layer Background Copy. I don't normally name every layer in my basic workflow, but I will try to remember to do that in this lesson. So my first step was the processing in Adobe Camera Raw. My second step is to copy the background layer. My third step is to decide upon a crop to work with. Some say to do it towards the end of your image, but I like to know what I'm working with. It really helps my vision. I don't find that there's any need to process pixels when I'm not going to use them later. And personally, I usually lean towards a landscape crop at the original ratio. So let's go up here to the cropping tool up here. Let's click on it. And up here on the crop options, when you click that open, you can actually find ratios to crop to. My camera is set to take images at a 2:3 ratio. So I'm going to leave that on there, but if I wanted to do a square crop, I could click up there on the 1:1 ratio and it would let me do a square crop. I'm going to put it down to 2:3 because that's what I enjoy. Now, if that happens when you're looking at your crop, all you do is go to these little arrows here and it'll flip the crop around to the orientation that you prefer. One thing to note on the crop menu bar is this little icon here, which is called the Set Overlay Options for the crop tool. If you click on it, it'll give you quite a few options to help you ascertain how you'd like to crop your image. You can use a rule of thirds, you can use a grid, you can use a diagonal, a triangle, a golden ratio, or a golden spiral. To me, I lean towards using the golden spiral. I don't know, it just seems to suit the way that I look at images. But please, if you need some guidance on cropping or to help you understand what may be a better crop for your image, don't be afraid to use these overlays because they really can help the way that you look at your photo. What you can do now is look at the photo and decide how you want it to crop. I've actually shot this image in a way that I probably don't need to crop at all or to crop very much, but I will crop it today. So what you do is you grab a corner and drag it in and out until you're happy. Now, on the golden spiral, I use that to place images in that sort of curve. So you can just press and hold on your image till you're happy. The way I'm looking at this image now, if the center of my subject sort of falls in line with that center of the spiral, I'm happy. I'm not going to put it over here because it wasn't shot to be like that, if you know what I mean. But I don't mind, rather than have the center of the flower up here, which is quite high, if I draw a line from a little bit up here across to there, I'm happy if the center of my subject falls in there somewhere. So if I had a line that went across, it's falling in there, and it's also, main part of the subject is falling in this constraints of this golden spiral. So let's choose that today, and we'll just tick that one off. If you don't like anything that you've just done, remember that you can go Control or Command Z on your keyboard to step backwards. Or you can go up to Edit, Redo Crop, or Undo Crop, whatever the option is up there at the time. So that's the third step. Let's move on to the fourth step in my basic workflow process. Let's talk about noise. You may like to skip this step if your image has no noise in it, but it's important to check on every image. Let's zoom in and see if there's any noise in this image which needs addressing, and I already know there is. I could tell that before I actually zoomed in. You can see it's quite noisy. Let's go full screen view. So now is the best time to fix your noise. You can do this at any step along your workflow process, but I like to do it at the beginning. I make sure my background copy layer is highlighted up there. I go to View. Oh, sorry, I don't go to View. I go to Filter, Topaz Labs, and I choose Topaz Denoise. Topaz Denoise is a very good program with lots of options in there which you can research. In this instance, I'm just going to leave it on standard, and let's have a look to see what it does for us. So this is the original image, and you can see here how it's removed the noise. Let's have a look at the main area of focus on this image. And what I look for is to see if it's kept some of the detail. So if you have a look in this area compared to this area over here, the noise has been removed, but the detail is still quite good there without getting too crazy. So I'm happy with that. We'll just go Apply. And it's actually applied the noise to the background copy. So if you wanted to, you could actually go that you've made that noise removal, I guess you could call that now if you like. Okay, let's save the image. I try and save as I go along. Just save it as a PSD file. And the next step is step number 5. We'll have a look at that soon. Step number 5 is about reducing distractions and making repairs to the image. We want to make sure that we do our work on a new layer. So I've made a copy of the layer and I've called that distractions. What I use as tools is the clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, and I also use content aware fill. I find that works well in most cases, but not all cases. So distractions are just what they are called. They are things that take your viewer's eyes away from the journey you want to lead them on. It's a very important step in your processing, so take the time to clean up before you move onwards. I cannot emphasize that enough. It really can take your image from a level C to a level A if you take the time to consider what is not necessary in your photo or how you can reduce the effect of whatever it is in your photo. It really is worth the effort. So on this flower, you can see, let's zoom in. You can see that there's quite a bit of mess because flowers do get quite dirty. Somebody I heard listen to recently called them dirty girls. Well, there you go, they probably are. So let's try first with the healing brush tool. I just go over here, click on healing brush tool, and then it's just a matter of going over the, spot healing brush tool is the one I want to start with. So it's just a matter of going over the area and seeing that it does a good job of moving those distractions. Now see how this is not really a major distraction, but it is a color distraction in my book. Is like this area here is yellow that I'm circling around, but really because this is a flower portrait and I want it to be a beautiful portrait of this Cosmo, I'm going to go and take the time to fix that up because I think it's important rather than to leave it there. Now, not always a flower portrait, you do not always need to take out all the messy bits. It depends what your view of your final image is. I'm not going to let you sit through while I do all this, so I'm quickly going to do it and then come back. Okay, let's have a look now. I've moved a lot of the little items that I don't want on the image because they've been quite easily to remove with the healing brush. But let's just have a look at these bigger ones here. And you can see that that's not very effective at all. In fact, it's made quite a mess there, as in not joining up the line. So I'm going to go Control Z and redo that. And how else can we do it? We could pick the cloning tool and clone stamp tool. I always work on an opacity that's quite low, which probably if you want to work around 20. The mode, I just leave it on normal, and the flow I leave at 100. I don't use a Wacom tablet or anything, I just use a mouse. So let's hold down the Alt key and select an area that we want to clone from and drag that over carefully. Oops, and didn't really work, did it? Drag that over there carefully. Oh, that's because actually, when I'm removing items, I actually work on a opacity of 100% in this instance. Let's go over there, remove that one. There's lots to clean up here still. I will go and do those. Let me try the healing brush tool again for these little bits. Doesn't work on that one. Might work in those little areas there. Okay, that's pretty well cleaned up as much as I would like to do it. I probably even took that a little bit further than I would normally do. Sometimes you just get in that zone, don't you? Let's have a look at using the content aware fill. I just want to show you there's a couple of areas I haven't addressed yet. The one is this little peak here of a petal behind this front petal. Do I want that there? I probably don't, because I just feel like it's just a distraction. So I'm just going to use the spot healing brush tool, click on it, and away it goes. That was quite simple. Got this little green stem point peeking out of the petal. I quite like that one, so I'm going to leave that there. But I don't actually like this one here. So I'm going to get my marquee tool. I'm going to get my lasso tool, and I'm going to draw around what I want to remove very carefully and stay as close to the edges as I can and join them up. Where the marching ants are, that's the area that's going to be filled. Then you right click with your mouse into that area and you can go fill. And when the little box pops up, make sure you choose content aware. I don't change anything else there, and I just go OK. And look at that. That's made quite a nice job of it, but I feel like if I get that spot healing brush tool now, just tap over those areas there, it'll tidy that up quite nicely. Let's have a look at the before and after of moving our distractions. So you can see it is worth the effort, and possibly that may have taken me around 3 minutes if I wasn't doing a video. In the next video, we're going to talk about step 6, which is adding contrast. Contrast, is it important? It is, it's very important. The next time you're enjoying an image of your own or another person's, take a look, and there's usually something about the main subject that draws you in. It's a combination of the lines, shapes, colour, and especially the contrast that's on the subject. Adding contrast to your subject adds a great amount of impact and helps to really bring your image alive. Some images, such as landscape, usually have a good amount of contrast added throughout the image. In my flower images, I usually only add contrast to the flower or my main subject or area of the flower. Other buds and leaves may receive a lesser amount of contrast added if I determine they require it. And this is where we begin to use Nik software, particularly the filter Color Efex. Before I do the next step, I need to merge all my work I've done so far into a stamp visible layer. And how you do that is you go Control, Alt, Shift and hold them all down on the keyboard at the same time that you press the E key, and it'll give you a layer up here that has merged all your work so far into one layer. To access the filter, we go up to Filter, Nik Collection, Color Efex Pro. Oh, here it happens. When you open up Color Efex, the first thing it does is show you the filter that you last worked on. So the last thing I was doing was the detail extractor. Make sure you turn it off, and it's easy, just click it up over here. In the Nik Color Efex filter, there is a large library which you can choose from underneath this tab. It's called All. I suggest you maybe one day, got nothing to do, sit down and have a look at those filters and really work out which ones that you think that you could use in your workflow. I have quite a few favourites over here in the favourite tabs that I like to use, and it's quite easy to put them in that favourite tab when you're looking at them under All. If you like to add one, like maybe if I want to add the contrast colour range to my favourites, all you do is click on the little star there, and then if you go over to favourites, it's in there now. I'm actually going to take that off because I don't use that very often. My favourites are Bleach Bypass, Brilliance Warmth, Darken Lighten Centre, Detail Extractor, Glamour Glow, high key, pro contrast, sunlight, tonal contrast, vignette filter, and the white neutralizer. And I will show you a couple of those in the process today. So we're talking about contrast. So the first one I want to use is pro contrast. So we go and click onto that. I don't use any presets. Let me show you the presets. So in every filter, if you have a look over here on the right hand side, there's little boxes. If you click on them, they will show you presets for that filter if you'd like to use any of those that you desire. But as for pro contrast, I don't use any preset filter in there. I just click on pro contrast, and over here all I do is use a dynamic contrast. I just think it's beautiful. I love the effect of it, and I push that up till around about, I don't know, 50%, I suppose. Let's see if we can see a before and after. Now remember what I said before, I don't add contrast to my overall image every time. So let's go down and press OK. That's going to bring it back into Photoshop. And when it comes up, it'll apply that contrast to the entire image. So you can see here that Nik actually renames the layer that you apply, which is very handy. If I turn that on and off, you can see that's contrast to my whole image. But I don't do that, like I said. What I do now is I go and add a mask on the image. So I go down here to the mask option, click on it. I need a black mask to hide the contrast that's been applied to the entire image. So how I can do that is I go, make sure I've clicked in the mask area here, and I go Control-I, and it'll turn it black. And you can see now that you can't see any difference because the black is concealing what work has been done onto that layer. I now need a white brush to brush through how much contrast I want the image to have. To make sure that my brush is white in colour, I'll go over here to the foreground background colour palettes, and if there are any other colours, let's just say if you're finding that they're both black or they're both white or they might have different colours in them, how you can go to your default is just to click these two little black and white ones up here, and that'll bring you immediately back to having a white foreground and a black background. So because we have a black mask here, I need a white brush, so make sure that's white, and you can go up and choose your brush tool, which is there, and I need to brush, and what I do now is I brush in where I want the contrast on my image. I think about my opacity up here. I usually like to brush in, don't freak out, I like to usually brush in at 100% so I can see what's happening over the main area that I want the viewer's eye to land upon. So let's just brush over here at 100% because that's the center. You can see that's quite nicely done. Now what I do now is I'll move this down to around about 50% opacity, make my brush a little bit larger, and I just want to brush that onto the petals. So there's contrast now on the petals and in the center, but they're at different opacity. This one's a higher opacity contrast than these ones, than the petals out towards. Let me turn that on and off so you can see. And if you're so inclined, you can brush it down the stem. So when you're considering where to put contrast on in your images, think about where you want that viewer's eye to travel. Let's just say we had a beautiful scene here of some water and hills in the background and a tree. So we had hills water and a tree. What we might do is the tree would probably be the main subject of your photo, so I would brush more contrast onto the tree. I would probably brush less contrast onto the water leading you up to the tree, and a bit less contrast across the mountains and the sky. So if it was a landscape, your whole image probably needs to have some contrast brushed in on it, but just think about the varying degrees of contrast. As I said before, I can't say it enough, your main subject in the photo must hold the most contrast for your viewer's eye. That's how I do my images if you want to take advice from me. Some other people may say other things. So that's my step 6, brushing in the contrast. We'll go on to step 7 next. Before we do that, let's see where we started from and ended up at the moment. And how you can do that is you hold down the Alt key, click on your background layer, and it'll turn all the layers on and off for you. So that's where we started, that's where we are. See you soon. So step 7 is choosing the colour temperature. Now that I've dealt with the basic contrast, it's time to move on to the colour temperature of the image. Would I like it to be a little bit warmer or cooler in its look? This obviously depends on the image and the feeling of the subject within, and also your vision of the final product. Let's go back into Nik and open it up. Filter, Nik Collection, Color Efex Pro. Wait. Let's turn Pro Contrast off now. And what I'm heading towards now is the white neutralizer. Now, like I said before, some of them have presets in them, and I love the presets on this white neutralizer. So let's go over here and click on the presets tab. You can go fix warm whites, strong warmth removal, which is really nice if you really want to push your images to a bit of a cooler area. But my absolute favorite, and I've got to say 99.9% of my images have got wedding dresses on it. That's what they call the preset. Let me turn that on and off for you. I don't know, it just has something that just adds that touch of warmth in a magical way that I really like. I don't touch any of the presets over here, and then I just go okay. Now I'm not going to mask this off my image because I want that whole warmth effect to be over the total image. Something to consider when processing your images when it comes to the color temperature is, did you know that the cooler colors in an image will recede more towards the background, and the warmer colors will come forward and make your subject just that bit more interesting and inviting to the viewer? That's something to consider. So in this step, all we've done is added a beautiful bit of warmth to the image. So that's my step 7. The next thing I do in Photoshop is check my levels. It's quite simple to do this. We go, make sure that we're on our top layer. We go down to the adjustment layers icon down the bottom, and we choose levels. I'm just going to move this up so you can see more what it's all about. Move that in a bit. This shows you the histogram, and they are important to understand. So if you don't understand them, I suggest you do some research into them. It'll help you when you're taking your photos because you can see your histogram in your camera, and it will also help when you're processing. Very basically, if the slider is too far to the right here and it's not matching up, that means there's some of your whites are being clipped in the image. If it's off kilter here, that means some of the blacks are being clipped in your image. One thing to do is when you're looking at your levels adjustment is press auto, see what it does. And you can see how it's brought that in on the left hand side and this side a little bit more than what it actually was. I just want to have a look to see if I'm happy with that by clicking the layer on and off. Pretty happy to accept the levels at this time, but I want to just drag those whites down a little bit. There. So in most cases you can go with auto. Sometimes auto just goes, wow, you wouldn't want to go with it. But leave it up to you. All you need to do is just drag those sliders to your eye where you want them to be. And you can play with your mid-tones there too. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about bringing your viewer's eye to the subject again, even more so. Okay, we're on to our second last step. It's about how to bring your viewer's eyes to the subject using light. Now we could finish off our image here, but there's one more step I suggest you do. This is to bring your viewer's eye to your subject using the darken, light and center filter within Nik. So what we need to do now is we need to make another stamp visible layer by going Control, Alt, Shift and in. We'll go up to Nik once again, Filter, Nik Collection Color Efex Pro. Back into our favourites, and the one we're going to use now is Darken, Light and Center. So we click on that and let's just go, as you look on it, you can see what it's sort of doing. It's putting light right at the moment, right in the centre of the image, but we don't want it to do that. We want to play with the parameters over here to have a little bit more control. The first option here is to look at the shape, and if you click on that you can choose from a sort of a square shape, and the number 2 option is a rectangle shape. I'm going to choose a squarish looking shape because of the shape of my flower in here. The next thing I do is go down to place the center. So you click on that little box there near place center. Then you go onto your image and you decide where you want the center of your light to be. So I actually want the center of my light to be down here. I don't want it to be up here. I want it to be bang on the subject. So let me turn that on and off. And you can see how it's put a vignette around the edge of the image and add a little bit more luminosity into the center. And it's really changed how the image looks as in regards to light. But we can still play with more. So I find that that border is a little bit too strong, so we can go to the border luminosity slider. If you want it actually to be darker, you could make it darker. If you want it to be not so dark or lighter, obviously, you can push it up to the right hand side. Let me turn that on and off. I still want the center of that image to be brighter. So let me go up to the center luminosity now and make that a little bit brighter. Bring my border down a little bit. And now I think that's quite nice. Let's have a look here. This is from when we went into Nik and after. Might even bring that border luminosity down a touch more. Yeah, that's better. See how it's really targeting the light in the middle now? I think that really adds that something special. And once again, it will help the journey that your viewer's eye will travel in on your photograph by adding that light. There's one more step to do, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Okay, we're on to step number 10, which is the final step in my very basic workflow. Once we get to this stage, it's now time to look to see if the image requires sharpening either all over or in selected areas. If you're producing a lovely and soft looking images like I do, I actually take it a little bit easy on the sharpening. I usually add a minimal amount in areas where I want them to fall. So let's have a look at this image. Where I want it to be sharpened is I want it to be sharpened in the center of the flower here. And I'll probably put, just like contrast, I'll probably put a lesser amount of sharpening in only some areas of the petals, not of them all. How I do my sharpening is I go Control, Alt, Shift and E to give me another stamp visible layer to apply the sharpening on. You can call it sharpening if you wish. It is better to rename the layers as you go along, especially if you're first learning and the workflow is new to you. And then we go up to Filter, Other. I choose High Pass. Now when this little High Pass box pops up, you can see areas in the image that sort of get an engraved type of look, and you can see it down here as well. You know, you don't want to push that. You want to start from the beginning and just put that up higher until you just see the areas that you want sharpened becoming engraved or embossed here. So you can see that very faintly. I'll do it really hard so you can see what happens if you go crazy. That's definitely not what you want. So let's go down. I think about 2 is good for this one. So we go OK. What we've got to do now is go up to our blending mode on our layers and change that to overlay. And if I turn that whole layer on and off now, let me zoom in. You can see the sharpening is being applied all over the image. So it's a global sharpening at the moment. What I want to do is I want to put a mask onto my sharpening layer. I want to press Control I so I can hide all the sharpening that's been applied. And I just want to brush in where I want the sharpening to be. So I make sure my foreground color is on white. My tool is a brush tool. The opacity, let's put it up to, let's use it at 100 on this main area and brush that over there. It's actually quite sharp. So what I can do now is change my foreground and background color, and I can do that by clicking on this little icon here. Now the black, now I've got a black brush. I'll brush that over at 100% to get rid of that because I thought that was way too harsh. You can see up here on the layer that there's no more white bits there anymore. So let me put my opacity of the brush down to about 50% to start working with. Change this back to a white foreground and brush that over. I think that looks better. I'm going to zoom out to more of my image. I'm going to lower the opacity of my brush again till about 20. And now what I'm going to sharpen is just the sharper bits in my petals. So it might be along there. Could be along here, here, here. And just go over them once. Don't keep going back and forward over them. I think that could do with some sharpening there. Maybe a touch there. Let me turn that on and off. It's quite faint, so you may not be able to see it, but I hope you get the idea that you, just like your contrast, you can control where your sharpening appears in the image. Okay, so that's the end of my 10-step basic workflow. I hope that you will take on some of the techniques on board, even if it's just a matter of thinking about why I do the things that I do. You can adapt your workflow into Lightroom or into Photoshop without using any other type of filter like Nik software or denoise. But I hope that I've explained to you why I do what I do and the reasoning why I do some things and how I apply them. Let's go back down and have a look at from the start to the end. Let me make the image full screen. Background. Hold down the Alt key and press the little eye on the background layer. So we started off there and we ended up here. So you can see it hasn't been an amazing amount of processing. That would only take me maybe 2 or 3 minutes when I'm doing it by myself, depending on how much distractions or little bits and pieces I need to clean up. That usually takes me the longest. The rest is just, I know what to do. I know the steps. I go bang, 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 do them. And then I'm always happy with my basic processing. It's now that I start to think about what else could I do to that image to enhance it a little bit more. Sometimes I do nothing if it's a simple portrait like this, but in other images I might carry on and do another maybe, I don't know how many steps, 5 or 6 more steps that I look at all the time and decide if I want to do them, and I'll talk about them in the next lesson. Thank you.